everyone, welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. President Lee Jae-myung sat down for talks with leaders from Japan, NATO, the UK, and the United Nations on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Canada. During talks with Japan's Prime Minister, the two sides vowed to build stronger ties based on mutual respect and trust. Tensions continue to escalate in Israel and Iran as the conflict enters its sixth day. Trump, who left the G7 summit early, returned to Washington for urgent talks with his national security team and said the U.S. knows where Iran's supreme leader is hiding, calling for Iran's unconditional surrender. North Korea has now decided to send thousands of construction workers to Russia to help rebuild the country's war-torn region, in latest sign of growing alliance between the two sides. On the sidelines of the G7 summit's expanded session, President Lee Jae-myung has been busily engaging in a series of bilateral meetings with fellow world leaders. For the latest, we go live to our presidential office correspondent Song Yujin. Yujin, what's the latest?
Well, Eunji, it's been a full day for President Lee Jae-myung, who took part in the G7 summit expanded session while holding a number of bilateral meetings in Kananaskis. I want to begin with President Lee's one-on-one with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, because even before departing for Canada, the focus was on whether Lee would meet with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts here at home. Now, as you know, while President Donald Trump left early due to the situation in the Middle East, Lee's very first face-to-face with Ishiba did take place on Tuesday afternoon local time, 9 days after their phone call. Now, during the 30-minute meeting, the two leaders agreed to build a stronger and more mature South Korea-Japan relationship based on mutual respect and trust, especially as this year marks the 60th anniversary of normalized diplomatic ties. They also reaffirmed their commitment to regular high-level meetings and continuing to advance discussions through official channels. Now, strengthening trilateral coordination with the United States, particularly in responding to regional geopolitical challenges, including North Korea, was discussed as well.
Right, and Yujin, aside from the meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, which other leaders has President Lee Jae-myung met with so far?
Well, President Lee also held meetings with the leaders of Brazil, the United Nations, Mexico, India, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and Canada. Now, for some key takeaways in talks with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the two discussed upgrading their post-Brexit free trade agreement with the latest round of negotiations held in London back in March. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres proposed that President Lee speak at the UN General Assembly in September on the resilience of South Korea's democracy following last December's martial law declaration. Lee's final bilateral was with this year's G7 host Canada, where he and Prime Minister Mark Carney agreed to deepen cooperation on security and defense. Now, President Lee specifically mentioned Korean companies' participation in Canada's submarine acquisition program, with Canada aiming to finalize contracts by 2028. Both sides also shared serious concern over the worsening situation in the Middle East and called for a swift de-escalation. Meanwhile, economic cooperation was a key common theme in Lee's talks with the leaders of Brazil, the European Union, Mexico, and India. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Eunji.
All right, thank you for that, Yujin. Leaders from around the world, not just those from the G7 group, met in Canada to address key global issues such as energy security. Among them was South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, who shared Korea's contributions for energy and AI. Our senior presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
It was all smiles with a warm welcome in Kananaskis, Canada, as the group of 7 began its expanded session with an official welcome and a group photo, with the notable absence of U.S. President Donald Trump. Invited were several guest countries, including South Korea, Australia, and India, for some crucial discussions.
For common problems in energy security, common opportunities in new technologies from information technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the need to have reliable supplies that this table can produce.
The new South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung took the opportunity on his debut on the global stage for multilateral summit diplomacy. His focus was on Korea's vision for diversifying energy, aiming to expand renewable energy and upgrade the country's power supply system at a time when there is more power demand due to the use of AI. Also addressed war security and critical minerals within the international framework and forging a global AI ecosystem, stressing Korea's role and contribution along the way. As Korea resumes its full-fledged diplomacy, the new president took the first step at the G7 summit, having unveiled Korea's visions for energy and AI. Now, many are watching whether more summit diplomacy would follow at the upcoming NATO summit next week. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Calgary.
Now, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is on his first diplomatic trip since taking office, as we just heard, and has engaged with leaders from countries including the UK and Japan. For more on the G7 summit and Lee's visit to Canada, we're joined by Professor Mason Ritchie, Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Ritchie, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So, President Lee Jae-myung held a bilateral meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister. What's your overall assessment of today's meeting, and how do you think President Lee should navigate relations with Tokyo throughout his term?
Yeah, so obviously the meeting between Lee and Ishiba took place in a somewhat more chaotic and rocky fashion in the lead up to that meeting, at least, than was probably expected due to Trump's departure. That meant that what was possibly going to include a brief trilateral meeting ended up obviously only being bilateral. But it looks, at least at first glance, that Lee and Ishiba said all the right things about building up their bilateral relationship, working together to deal with international crises, including North Korea. Looking forward in the relationship rather than only backwards, while dealing with some of those historical issues in a parallel track, and taking another bite of the apple going forward on the trilateral relationship with the United States. So it sounds to me like they're, relatively speaking, off on a good path, and it sounds, at least at first, like Lee's cashing in on the campaign promise to indeed show something of a change of direction vis-a-vis Japan compared to the previous Democratic Party administration of Moon Jae-in.
Right, and at the G7 summit, U.S. President Trump said kicking Russia out of the group was a mistake and even suggested that adding China is not a bad idea. Is Trump interested in turning the G7 back into the G8 or even expanding that to a G9 with China?
So I certainly don't have any privy to what's going through Trump's mind in this regard. But if I had to guess, at the moment, this sounds like one of those times when Trump is musing out loud, thinking out loud about something that crosses his radar, that doesn't have any institutional support within the United States, and probably more importantly, doesn't have any institutional support in the other members of the G7. Europe simply isn't going to let Russia back into the G7 and turn it into a G8 again until the war in Ukraine winds down in some type of acceptable fashion for Europe. So I think that's one place to start. And frankly speaking, I don't see that there's much appetite for adding China to the G7 format either.
Right, and as you mentioned, President Lee was not able to hold a meeting with Trump there, as he had to leave the G7 early because of the conflict between Israel and Iran. How do you think the situation in the Middle East will unfold, and how could this possibly affect South Korea, do you think?
Well, it's extremely uncertain, I think, what's going on right now in the Middle East in terms of the Israeli attacks against Iran, Iran's retaliation against Israel, and the role that the United States has played and will play going forward But it sounds like the U.S. Is joining the conflict in some form or another. If you were to look at where the U.S. would probably bring the greatest value added in the short term, it would probably be some type of B-2 bomber run or perhaps several runs of B-2 bombers with massive ordnance penetrators, what are colloquially known as bunker busters. There's a 30,000-pound version that the United States has that Israel can't deliver that could be used to try to disable the Fordo nuclear enrichment facility. That's probably where I would think that the United States would have the most value added, and Trump would be perhaps most likely to use U.S. assets. What the effect of this would be for South Korea really depends, I think, on the severity and the duration of the conflict. You could probably see a run-up in oil prices, although that's not guaranteed because the world is, has a much more complex oil supply structure than we used to have in previous Middle East conflicts. South Korea could potentially face some threats to some of its locals in the region, not only in Iran, but also in other neighboring countries. The United States, depending on how long this goes on, could be distracted from its Indo-Pacific obligations in some form. International law is really under threat. This seems like a preventive war rather than a preemptive war, and preventive wars are not allowed by international law. So I think there's a real risk to the undermining of international law. And of course, good luck now trying to convince North Korea to denuclearize. Clearly, they will have looked at what's happened in Iran and added that to the list of things that they've seen happen in the Middle East, including Saddam Hussein's death and in North Africa, Muammar Gaddafi's death, and clearly realized that there's no way in the world that they should ever give up their nuclear weapons.
All right, and the United States and Britain signed a trade deal in Canada while Japan did not. What's your take on this? Do you think South Korea will be able to reach a trade agreement with the Trump administration before the July deadline?
We don't know very much about that deal that the UK has made with the United States. It seems very unclear. The details haven't been worked out. I'm frankly skeptical that right now there's a whole lot of meat on the bones on that. Trump likes symbolism more than substance, so we'll see how that actually shakes out. Japan, hasn't signed a deal. It's really been standing up for itself and standing up for its interests and really sort of demanded that tariffs go back to zero. Frankly speaking, I think that's what South Korea should do too. They should try to implement all of the tools and all the advantages that they have in their arsenal, including investment in the United States, shipbuilding, any possible way of adjusting the alliance, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that they should stand up for themselves. Whether or not they manage to reach a deal before the July deadline, I don't know. But my guess is you probably are going to be looking at a situation where even if they aren't, that there would be some type of extension pending a resolution to this, coming later in the year.
Right, we'll have to see how that plays out. And President Lee also said he'll focus on pragmatic diplomacy as he faces the challenge of balancing between, Korea's biggest security ally, the United States, and biggest trading partner, China. So how do you think he should navigate this?
Yeah, clearly, one moment, I have to plug in my computer. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
My apologies. My computer almost died. I didn't realize it. Clearly, they need to find, common ground, where possible. South Korea is going to have to work with the United States in the alliance context. It's going to have to work with China in an economic context. The United States also has to work, South Korea also has to work with the United States in an economic context. And of course, China here represents an incipient threat, notably in terms of hybrid warfare in the region. So there's a lot of tightrope walking that's going to have to take place. And in addition to simply, dealing with that tightrope walking and asserting South Korea's interests where it can, the other thing that I think South Korea really needs to do is to work with other middle powers. They need to really work well with Japan. They need to cooperate with the European Union, with ASEAN, with Australia, with Canada, with India, and really, I think, broaden and diversify and make more comprehensive their partners, not only economically, but also in other areas, including diplomacy. upholding international law and the rules-based order, and also in security and defense. I think that's the best way to sort of mitigate the potential risks, both coming from China and from the U.S.
Right. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Professor Mason Ritchie, thank you for your insight. We appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Also in Canada, South Korea's new First Lady Kim Hea Kyung made her first solo appearance on Tuesday, meeting with members of the local Korean community at the Calgary Korean Association. According to the presidential office, Kim expressed heartfelt appreciation for their continued connection to Korea and promised better support for overseas Koreans. In the afternoon, the First Lady visited the National Access Arts Center, an arts institution in Calgary led by a Korean director, where she met artists with disabilities. She expressed interest in Canada's disability support policies and emphasized the importance of expanding cultural exchanges between South Korea and Canada in the field of disability arts. Amid escalating tensions in the Middle East, U.S. President Donald Trump cut short his participation in the G7 summit for urgent consultations at home. He's now warning that the U.S. knows where the Iranian leader is hiding, calling him an easy target. Our Muniran has more.
As the conflict between Israel and Iran continues to escalate, U.S. President Donald Trump convened a National Security Council meeting in Washington. Taking to social media on Tuesday ahead of the talks, Trump warned that the U.S. knows where Iran's supreme leader is hiding and called for unconditional surrender. He added that while the Iranian leader is an easy target, they are not going to kill him, at least for now. Following the 18-minute NSC meeting, CNN reported that Trump is warming to the idea of using U.S. military assets to strike Iran, and that he spoke by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. American strategic bombers equipped with bunker-busting munitions are seen as a key component of any potential operation aimed at disabling Iran's Fordo nuclear facility. According to Reuters, fighter aircraft have been deployed to the Middle East already, although U.S. military officials have emphasized their defensive nature. So far, Washington's involvement in the conflict has remained defensive, supporting Israel by helping intercept Iranian missile attacks. The U.S. already has significant military presence in the region, including troops, warplanes, and air defense systems equipped to neutralize aerial threats. While the White House has yet to issue an official statement regarding the outcome of the NSC talks, analysts suggest that the administration may also be preparing a diplomatic proposal alongside its military options.
This would involve ending the Iranian nuclear program, Iran agreeing to not controlling any uranium enrichment capability, and then in return, the United States would lift economic sanctions.
On Monday, Israel issued evacuation orders affecting 300,000 people in central Tehran. President Trump took to his social media platform on the same day, urging civilians to immediately evacuate the Iranian capital. The U.S. State Department has since launched a task force to assist American citizens and residents seeking to leave the region. As the situation unfolds, global attention is now on whether the United States will enter the Israel-Iran conflict with military support or push for peaceful negotiations. 문혜련, Arirang News.
North Korea is sending thousands of military personnel to help rebuild a Russian city damaged by its war with Ukraine. The deployment marks a new phase in Pyongyang's deepening partnership with Moscow, one that now extends beyond the battlefield. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil has a story.
North Korea is sending thousands of military construction workers to Russia's Kursk region, including 5,000 construction workers to rebuild damaged infrastructure and 1,000 sappers to clear the area of landmines. The decision was announced by Russia's top security official Sergei Shoigu after he met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang on Tuesday afternoon, their second meeting in just 2 weeks.
It's a gesture of brotherly support from the North Korean people and their leader Kim Jong-un.
North Korea is believed to have already sent some 12,000 combat troops to Russia's Kursk region since October. South Korean intelligence says around 600 have been killed, with total casualties nearing 4,700. Analysts say Pyongyang's support isn't without strings, and it's likely expecting a payoff.
North Korea will likely get advanced systems like the Pantsir air defense weapon and reconnaissance satellite technology.
Professor Kim added that Pyongyang will also likely receive oil and food supplies in return, crucial support as it struggles under sanctions and isolation. Other analysts say the visit also reflects shared concerns over Washington's recent signals regarding the situation in the Middle East.
With Trump doubling down on saying Iran must never get nuclear weapons, Russia may be reassuring North Korea, which has taken real risks for Moscow and still wants full recognition as a nuclear power.
Pyongyang gave no details on the new deployment, but said the two sides exchanged views on global and regional issues and reached full consensus. Meanwhile, South Korea criticized the move, saying employing North Korean workers abroad violates UN Security Council resolutions, and called on Pyongyang and Moscow to immediately stop their cooperation. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. At least 10 people were killed when a ballistic missile flattened a 9-story residential building in Kyiv on Tuesday, as Russia carried out its deadliest attacks on the city in months. Kyiv was hit by a massive assault involving over 440 drones and 32 missiles, striking 27 locations across the capital in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Ukraine's southern port city of Odessa was also targeted in a separate strike. Among those killed in the apartment block bombing was a 62-year-old American citizen, while more than 100 others were wounded. Kyiv's mayor announced a day of mourning, while President Zelensky denounced the strike as one of the most horrific on the capital since the war began. At the same time, Russian forces launched an attack on Odessa, targeting civilian infrastructure, killing at least 2 people and injuring more than a dozen. Over in Argentina, former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner has been placed under house arrest after a 6-year corruption sentence was upheld. On Tuesday local time, a federal court in Buenos Aires approved 72-year-old Kirchner's request to serve her sentence at home rather than in prison, with judges taking her age and health into consideration. She is subject to an electronic ankle monitor and strict restrictions, including remaining at her residence except for approved outings and providing a list of authorized visitors within 48 hours. This follows the Supreme Court's decision to uphold her 2022 conviction for directing public works contracts to an ally and to enforce a lifetime ban from public office. Meanwhile, thousands of Kirchner's supporters took to the streets in Buenos Aires, fighting for her release. Despite her legal situation, Kirchner, who served 2 terms as president from 2007 to 2015 and is a former first lady, remains a powerful presence among working-class Peronists. The European Commission has put forward a legally binding plan to phase out Russian gas and LNG imports by the end of 2027, aiming to formally end the EU's energy dependence on Moscow. Under the proposal on Tuesday, no new gas or LNG contracts may be signed after January 1, 2026. Short-term contracts concluded before June 17, 2025 must end by June 17 next year, and all existing long-term contracts will be terminated by January 1, 2028. LNG terminals will also stop servicing Russian clients on a similar timetable. The proposed ban is structured in accordance with EU trade and energy laws, allowing for its adoption with a qualified majority and bypassing vetoes from Hungary and Slovakia. Pope Leo XIV is set to spend half of July at his Castel Gandolfo summer residence, away from the sweltering Roman summer. The Vatican confirmed on Tuesday that the pontiff will stay in the traditional papal residence on the shores of Lake Albano from July 6th to 20th, with an additional weekend break in mid-August over the Feast of the Assumption. The move revives a centuries-old practice discontinued under Pope Francis, who remained in the Vatican. While Rome's midday heat has soared past 35 degrees Celsius this month, Castel Gandolfo's estate is roughly 10 degrees cooler. The Pope's public and private audiences have all been suspended from July 2nd through July 23rd, and Vatican activities will resume on July 30th.
The heat is truly building day by day, and it's going to be a very warm one today. The capital will see the peak of this week's heat on Thursday, climbing to 32 degrees. Daegu will soar to even warmer daytime highs, so remember to stay well hydrated. The sun will be extremely strong as well, with very high UV levels expected. Then Seoul will be seeing a high of 31 degrees, Gwangju at 32. Meanwhile, following the start of the monsoon season on Jeju Island last week, monsoon rain will begin in both central and southern regions later this week. Be prepared for a strong start as heavy rainfall is expected from the outset. The monsoon rains will begin in the central region tomorrow night, then expand to most other areas by Friday. Northern Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do can expect up to 80 millimeters, while other regions will see around 60 millimeters. So please get ready for the monsoon and stay safe in the heat today.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.